and then back to share. Okay, so this, this is just off the website, but this is boldest open space plan in the past 100 years. Whoops, let me go back one. What triggered my idea for suggesting this for a dinner is that last summer, because of my osteoarthritis, I tried to get out and get walks in. We'd go to gardens in Oakville on Sunday afternoons on the lakeshore. And I said, let's go down and see what's going on at the university campus. And this is the big hole in the ground that I found walking around. And then made contact with, come on, hang on a minute. There we are. Made contact with people who introduced me to Christine. And she's unfortunately, I have to deal with something here so that I can see, how do I get down to one? There it is. Okay, let's go back. Come on. Jeez. Damn it. Pardon me.
Is there an arrow at the bottom left of the screen, Jim?
Yeah, there might be. No, let's go. Oh, there it is. Thank you. So Christine's the Assistant Vice President, Campus Planning, Chief Planner. She spent 20 years in large-scale master planning. Her professional goal is to respond to each unique city building and development opportunity, bring forward great urban neighborhoods and public places, which this is going to be. And she brings a whole bunch of experience in terms of bringing together objectives, design excellence, and working to make a very effective setup. And she was selected to this Women's Leadership Initiative Championship team a few years ago. And then Donald Lanesley was a 5-year principal of University College. I think it was Principal Donald, and chair of both the Department of Faculty and Department of Philosophy and Arts and Science, and a tri-campus graduate Department of Philosophy. Revitalized programs, revised its governance, led something called the Socrates Project, which allows a unique way of students to learn philosophy. Philosophy was not a course I took, but won a teaching award for the Northrop Frye Teaching Award. If anybody, I'm sure many are aware of Northrop Frye, the former principal of Victoria College. And he studied math, this is what I find interesting, he studied math as an undergraduate, but earned his PhD in philosophy. And then Scott Ling is a senior planner at University Planning, a licensed architect, 10 years of experience, and a graduate of the university's John Daniels Faculty of Architecture. And oops, I went the wrong way there. So I'm gonna, at this point, turn it over to Dawn and Christine. Christine, I believe, is gonna talk, and Dawn and Scott work on the slide projection. So go ahead, Dawn, put your slides up.
Thank you, Jim. And while Dawn is doing that, I just want to mention that we also have Ruth Binns on the as one of the presenters from the development office, in case anybody wants to talk about that aspect of the landmark project.
Okay, I'm just getting my screen here. All right, sharing. Can you guys all see my screen?
Yes.
And you can hear me? So that's good. So thank you for that introduction.
Yes.
Just before we start, I would like to acknowledge the land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it's been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. So here's a drone's eye view of Front Campus. Just to correct Jim slightly, I was principal of University College from 2011 to the end of 2019. I finished right before the pandemic. I timed my exit from administration quite well. When I was principal, I was actually living on campus at Bissell House, which is the principal's residence at UC. And when you're on campus 24/7, you can't help but get a good sense of how the campus makes a difference to the various communities that spend their time there. So it's students, faculty, staff, alumni, but also the local communities and the tourists who come from all over the world to see one of Toronto's most significant sites. Now, living on campus meant that I also was able to see a lot of change. In the about 8.5 years that I lived there, it was remarkable how much you could see the city growing up around us and really encroaching on one of the central open spaces of the city. The condos on Bloor Street and Bay Street, and now also on College Street, and the university projects on the west side of campus, which I don't think are there yet in this image. And you got the sense that within a few decades, the university campus, particularly its historic core, will be an oasis in a highly urbanized, high-rise city. So the plan today is for me to say a little bit about the campus landscape and how it developed historically, and then I'm going to pass it over to Christine and Scott to talk about what we're up to in transforming it now through the Landmark Project. And I want to give you a word of caution. I'm a philosophy professor. I'm not an urban planner. I'm not a landscape architect. I'm far from that. But so I'm speaking to you today really as an amateur, but one who has deep love for U of T and its history. My family has been attending U of T since the 19th century. And it really was a great honor to serve as principal of University College for 8.5 years. Now, the story I'm going to be telling will maybe come across as a little bit UC-centric, and that's just partly my history at the university. But it's also because I'm going to be focusing on the center of campus, and obviously University College was the first building. It is at the heart of campus. So there won't be that much that I'll be saying about the federated colleges, Victoria, Trinity, and St. Mike's. So sorry for alumni of those colleges. You won't be getting too much about your parts of campus. So our agenda for today, I'm going to start with talking about the past, the original vision of the campus, how the rise of the car really changed things, and I would say mostly for the worse. And then the beginnings of the steps the university has taken to reclaim the space for the ever larger numbers of students, faculty, staff, and the alumni and the rest of the community. Then I'll pass it over to Christine and Scott, who are going to talk about the future. So the Landmark Project, how we're in the course of doing Landmark, moving towards a climate positive campus, the Indigenous landscape that's been developed as part of the broader Landmark Project, the Indigenous landscape that's going to be just outside of Hart House. And finally, some images of how the construction is going right now. So yes, there is a big hole in the center of Front Campus still, but it'll end up as making the campus even better. So let me start. I'm going to have to say a little bit about the history of U of T to start. We say that U of T was founded in 1827. We're in the countdown towards the bicentennial right now. What really happened then was that Bishop Strawn, who was the Anglican bishop of what was then the town of York, went to London to get a royal charter for a university in this small colony of Upper Canada. And Strawn's vision was for a university that would serve the Anglican elite, and that was ultimately called King's College. The legislature purchased 150 acres in 1828. Planning to have that as where the university would be located. It's the area bounded by what's now Bloor Street, Bay Street, College Street, and St. George Street. In 1829, the new college purchased land that would allow for a grand avenue leading to campus from the south, and that's now University Avenue, and also an avenue leading from Yonge Street into the east side of campus, and that's now, of course, College Street. But there was actually a pretty slow start to building the college, mostly because of political controversies over the role of the Anglican Church and the English elite in controlling higher education. The Upper and Lower Canada Rebellions of 1837, which I'm sure you remember from your history classes, was in a way an expression of this same tension in the young colony. So it wasn't really until 1842 that things got underway and that construction on King's College got started. And the first classes weren't admitted until 1843 using temporary facilities on Front Street. The original portion of King's that was built, which was kind of a Greek revival design, you see an image of it here, it opened in 1845 on the site of what's now the provincial legislature. In 1859, the university leased that land to that's now called Queen's Park. It was leased to the city, and in 1880, a portion of this Queen's Park was selected by the government of Ontario as the site for the new legislature. And in 1886, they demolished the original King's College and started construction of the Ontario legislature, which opened in 1893. And the university still rents the land in Queen's Park to the government. I think we even get paid $1 a year or some such figure. In the meantime, there was political change. There was a move towards responsible government in what was by then the United Province of Canada. And the Robert Baldwin government looked to resolve the so-called university question by closing King's College and reopening as a non-sectarian University of Toronto in 1850. University College was then established in 1853 to serve as the instructional college, with the university itself primarily serving as an examining and a degree granting institution. So now it was time for the university to really start properly. And the hope at the time was that some of the small religious affiliated colleges in Ontario, such as the Methodist Victoria College in Cobourg, Presbyterian Knox and Queen's colleges, the Catholic St. Mike's College, and even the newly established Anglican College, Trinity, that Bishop Strong created on Queen Street in what's now Trinity Bellwoods Park. The hope was that these small religious colleges would affiliate and thus federate with the University of Toronto on a kind of Oxbridge model. And many of them did, as we know, and that led to the complex institutional structure we have today. In the meantime, plans were drawn up for the University College building and the related grounds. The original plan placed the university's building in a park-like setting, with the thought that the students, who were only young men at that time, women weren't admitted until 1884, that the men would benefit as much from time outside the classroom as in. And so you see this layout of the campus area with Tattle Creek having its very prominent role, running from the north, which is on the left side of the screen, to the south on the right. And you can see in the pink the original outline of the University College building on the bottom half of the image. Now, there was a long history of Indigenous activity along the creek. The people we admit or the people we acknowledge in the land statement, the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River, who used the river to fish and to have settlements and so on. But with the rise of colonialism, the Mississaugas ended up participating in the Toronto Purchase of 1787, when the British Crown took itself to have acquired ownership of over 250,000 acres in what then became called York County. As the city of York and then Toronto developed around it, more and more of Tattle Creek was buried underground. So east of Church Street, it was buried before 1860. From Elizabeth Street to Church Street, it was in 1866, and the University of Toronto sections were buried in 1884. The plan you see here shows a pond adjacent to a lovely landscape garden. The pond was created by damming the river in 1859, and it was called McCall's Pond. You can see an image of it here, and you get a sense of what it was like to have a pond there on campus outside Hart, the location of what became Hart House. University College itself was built between 1856 and 1859, and you see a sense of its construction here. And then here are two images of it. The one on the right is actually from the location where Hart House was eventually constructed. And here's an image, a painting of it with McCall's Pond in the foreground. So you really get the sense that it was a bucolic campus in those days. In 1870, the first monument in Queen's Park was constructed, and that's the Volunteers Monument for those people who came out and defended the British Empire, really, against the Fenian Raiders. The Fenian Raiders were Irish nationalists, veterans of the Civil War in the US, who wanted to promote the cause of Irish independence by attacking the British Crown in Canada. And in the Battle of Ridgeway, the University College students who had just finished exams, this was 1866, in the spring, early summer, went out to help support the defense, and 3 students died. And if you've been in University College's East Hall, there's a stained glass window that's devoted to the memory of the students who died in the Fenian raids. Because the Fenian raids was really the first military activity undertaken by this new young country, it was taken to be a very serious element to be commemorated annually. There'd be an annual commemoration and remembrance of the Fenian raid, the people who died in the Fenian raids. That, of course, was changed after the First World War, much more significant military battle. University College, almost, what is it, 132 years ago to today, so it was February 14th in 1890. The University College was inviting the community in, and in the course of preparations, there was one of the staff members carrying a bunch of oil lamps and tripped and fell, and the college went up in flames and was quite significantly damaged. You get a sense of what it looked like. This is the West Hall of University College after the fire, or just in the very end of the fire. And this is some of the building that was the way it was after the fire was out. Rather remarkably, it was rebuilt and reopened by 1892, an incredibly quick turnaround. And you can see the students here playing cricket on the lawn, and they continued to benefit from a campus that combined excellent architecture with beautiful grounds. Across King's College Circle from University College is, of course, Convocation Hall. In 1907, our donor community rallied together to help build Con Hall, with its dome rotunda as one of Toronto's landmark buildings and certainly one of the university's iconic buildings. And a century later, there was a campaign where the alumni came together to help restore Convocation Hall. You'll see in front of this image one of the oldest buildings on campus, the Royal Magnetic Observatory. The architects were Frederick Cumberland and William Storm, who later were given the commission for University College. Its original location was adjacent to what is now Con Hall, but in 1907, the observatory was no longer useful given the evolution of the university and the city surrounding it. But Lewis B. Stewart, the professor of surveying, geodesy, and practical astronomy in the Department of Civil Engineering, argued that it should be rebuilt, and so it was in its present location adjacent to UC and Hart House. In 1953, it was turned over to the Students' Administrative Council, or SAC, for their use, although its successor organization, the University of Toronto Students' Union, has recently vacated the space because they have developed a students' common on Huron and College Street in the old architecture building. And we're in the process of thinking through what we should do with the Stewart Observatories. So I'd love to hear ideas about what might be a good use for that building in the future. So here we see Convocation in 1914. I love this image for many reasons. For one thing, my grandfather, also Donald Ainsley, was a student at University College at the time. He started his studies in 1911, so 100 years before I started my term as principal of University College in 2011. And it also shows how the campus was meant to be, a green space surrounding our academic buildings that could be used for curricular and co-curricular activities. But of course, this is 1914. In the spring, change was imminent. On the one hand, you see in the back corner of this image a few cars, and the car had started to make itself present on campus. But more ominously, a few months later, Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated, and by late July, early August, the First World War had begun. With the war, the campus was pressed into service as a training ground. So there was the Canadian Officer Training Corps. You see here COTC members training with Hart House in the background. So Hart House started construction in 1912. It opened after the war in 1919 and got to celebrate its centennial just before the pandemic. The total enlistment of the University of Toronto in the First World War, there were 5,308 staff, graduates, and undergraduates in the war, 628 of whom did not survive. The campus was especially important for the nascent Canadian contingent of the Imperial Royal Flying Corps. They did some training here. You see a biplane in front of UC. A couple of years ago, the engineers, for their Remembrance Day intervention, campus intervention that they do each year, recreated a biplane in that very location based on this photograph. Here you see the Royal Canadian Flying Corps with tents in the background where some people were living, and then a plane overhead doing its training flights. This is from around 1918, they think. Now, after the war, the president of the university, Sir Robert Falconer, proposed that the alumni raise funds for, and I'm quoting here, the erection of some memorial. It must be a beautiful structure, as fine as the architecture can make it, not too large, but a true memorial, worthy of the greatest event in the university's history. I myself believe, in addition, there should be an endowment to perpetuate otherwise than in stone the work of our soldiers. So you see Soldiers Tower starting its construction there. The carillon of Soldiers Tower now has 51 bells. The largest bell was funded by donations from University College alumni, and fragments from the original college bell, which melted in the fire of 1890, fragments from that bell were taken to the foundry when they were casting the bells for the Soldiers Tower carillon, and so it's been incorporated into the new base bell. And other divisional and college alumni associations donated funds to buy some of the other bells of the carillon. And here you see some people at the first Remembrance Day after the dedication of Soldiers Tower. So this is November 11th, 1924. And I think everyone here on this call knows the names of the U of T war dead are inscribed on the panels pictured here, flanked by verses from another UC alumnus, John McCrae's famous poem, In Flanders Field. So the next section of my car will talk about how this new technology, the automobile, transformed our campus. I love this picture. This is a car on Yonge Street at Balliol Street in 1913. Obviously, the Model T started mass production of cars in 1908, and so cars slowly started to make their way into the cities. Slowly at first, and then with great rapidity. To give you a sense of how this happened and how quickly. So they did a count of the number of automobiles and horse-drawn vehicles that passed through the Bloor and Dundas intersection in 1914. So there were approximately 350 cars and 250 carriages of various kinds in 1914. By 1925, at that same location, the number of cars traveling through that point had increased to almost 8,000, where the number of horse-drawn vehicles had dwindled to 15. And you have to think about that. That's incredibly, the transformation of the city that cars created, it happened in a really short time, just a decade plus. And you know, we really have been coming to terms with that transition ever since in city building, I think. Here's a professor of mining, H.E. Haltane, in his family car, and it was a gift to him for his work in the First World War. I like this picture as well. This is the convocation in 1925. And in the 1914 convocation picture I showed a second ago, there were hardly any cars. And here in 1925, there it is, all the parking on King's College Circle. It's already started. It's not to say that the university wasn't trying to make plans for how the campus should develop. There was a report on landscape improvement and general expansion that came out in 1917, and it called for a wall around campus with significant gates and entry points. But the challenges of the era really stopped the plans from ever being implemented. Basically, after the war, there was significant inflation and some budgetary challenges that resulted, followed by, of course, the Depression. So there wasn't that much building done in this era, though some new buildings were constructed, and in this case, UC's Whitney Hall, with its delightful quad pictured here during a tea. And of course, then the Second World War happened. And again, U of T made significant contributions to the war effort with over 10,000 staff, students, university community members participating. The University Naval Training Division was established on campus to train men for the Royal Canadian Navy. Training for radar technicians was given to 500 recruits who were housed in tents and fed at Hart House. Flavel, at a house on Queen's Park Crescent, became a training center for the Women's Royal Canadian Naval Service, the WRENS, and the RCAF Women's Division trained in Hart House. After the war, the veterans flooded the university, leading to the creation of the second temporary campus in Ajax for the engineers. And a few short years later, the university started to brace for one of its most significant decisions: how to respond to the baby boom. There was debate over whether it was clear that the university must grow with the numbers of students that were expected to come. There was debate about whether to grow to the south or to the west, and ultimately the decision was taken to cross St. George Street. The recommendation was to eliminate all the streets between St. George and Spadina and between Harvard and College. That would leave the campus for pedestrians only, with deliveries coming through underground tunnels. There are to be playing fields and other kinds of green spaces. But no, the government didn't want to pay for anything beyond the buildings, and the roads remain. Even though Claude Bissell, who implemented the campus expansion, he proposed tunneling St. George under campus from Hoskin to College. You see here the image of the opening of Sid Smith Hall in 1960. There's a significant renovation of Sid Smith currently being planned, will shortly be executed by the Faculty of Arts and Science. There is the roads through this part of campus never did become free of cars, except for until recently. Wilcox now, between St. George and Huron, has become an outdoor space that's car-free, that allows students to play basketball and sit outside with their lunch, and so on. It's been a very successful transformation of the street. Unfortunately, there's not much green space west of St. George beyond some quads, such as New College's quad pictured here, or the urban forestry hidden within the Earth Science Forestry Complex. The quad of Earth Sciences, there are actually two quads. There's a Carolinian forest in one quad and a boreal forest in the other, and that's the one pictured here. The landscape architect for these quads was Michael Huff, who arrived from the UK in the late 1950s and helped to launch U of T's landscape architecture program.
I'm on a session.
Someone should mute themselves. Thanks, Jim. The landscape architect was Michael Huff, and his many other accomplishments include Ontario Place with Eb Zeidler, and also the Bring Back the Dawn initiative. One of his first projects in Canada was the University College Quad, created in 1964 with the opening of the Laidlaw Wing. You see what it was like, what it was like here. Now, as you might know, University College has just completed a significant interior renovation, and also thanks to a generous gift from Ed and Fran Clark, we were also able to update the quad while respecting Huff's initial design. And the quad awaits the spring to have its final refreshing, and then it'll have its opening hopefully when we can gather together in person in the fall. Now, on the east side of the campus, there's a similar story about how the car really kind of destroyed a lot of what was great about the bucolic campus that was the original plan. Particularly in the late 1940s, the city implemented a plan to arterialize, that's a hard word to say, Avenue Road, Queen's Park, and University Avenue, with new overpasses and a significant expansion of Queen's Park Crescent West. And so this is the way it was before that happened. And then this is the way it was afterwards. This is an overhead shot from the mid-1950s. It's more or less the same now. One of the most frustrating moments on campus is when cars speed along at highway speeds along Queen's Park Crescent, while tens of thousands of students are trying to get to Vic and St. Mike's. It's amazing there haven't been more accidents there. So now I'm going to talk about how the university started to address some of these problems starting in the 1990s. The change for the better started with St. George Street. Here you see a picture of the way St. George Street was, a 4-lane road that was treated as another route downtown. It wasn't really treated as a major part of the university campus. The picture is of students moving to Innis College's new home in 1976. But you can see just how St. George Street behind it is really just an awful street. But then there was a plan in 1995 through a St. George Street Ideas competition, where Brown and Story designed a way of making the street more welcoming for everybody and putting students and pedestrians before cars. So Brown and Story were the designers. They were awarded the commission for the project in a joint venture with Van Nostra and DeCastri Architects. And the idea was to move the emphasis from cars to pedestrians. And you actually feel the impact every time you walk down St. George Street. This was all possible thanks to the visionary leadership of a Trinity alum, Judy Matthews, who made a significant donation to catalyze the project. And U of T was thus able to start implementing it in 1996. Judy and her husband Will continue to make transformative investments in the cityscape, most recently with the Bentway, the new park under the Gardner Expressway, which currently hosts all sorts of interesting activities and is always worth a visit. So this is when St. George Street with lovely flowers. As Jennifer Keesmaat, the former chief planner of the city, said, St. George Street in Toronto was one of the first and best examples in our city of creating a clear divide between spaces for cars and spaces for people. In 1940, the road was widened for cars. In 1997, it was redesigned for people, safety, and for public life. And you see students enjoying it here, and that's a very common sight. The success of the St. George project led U of T to develop a consultative process to develop its first open space master plan. And the result was what was called Investing in the Landscape, which was a 1999 document. The initial phases of implementation started then as well. So the firm, I can never say this one as well, Andropagon, they were the landscape architecture firm that worked with the university to remake King's College Road into a proper entrance to campus, with new trees made possible by friends and families of the late Robin Gibson. You also see the campus gates here that were envisioned way back in the 1917 plan for the university's campus. And there are these interstitial paths that connect King's College Circle with St. George Street with these lovely naturalized birch trees and wildflowers. These paths were made possible thanks to support from William and Nona Heaslip. The landscape architects also did several case studies, sort of inspiring investigations of what could be possible in precincts such as Hart House Green, King's College Circle, and Spadina Circle. And one of the things they mooted here was the return of McCall's Pond outside of Hart House. Here's the idea of a convocation plaza at Conn Hall and a more perfect circle for King's College Circle. In this document, in investing in the landscape, the report says that another focal place for campus is Spadina Circle. And it said, the return of Spadina Circle to a landscape of landmark quality would be a widely celebrated result of this new master plan. And then Spadina Circle has indeed come back to life with the relocation of what's now called the Daniels Faculty of Architecture, Landscape, and Design to the former site of Knox College. Public Work did the landscaping for this project, and I know I speak for many when I say that the new building and the grounds have reestablished the circle as one of Toronto's most important focal points. But this phrase, the idea of a landscape of landmark quality, that took on a new meaning starting in 2013. Because investing in the landscape, the campus plan, it faced a fundamental problem. It never did sort out what to do with the cars. As much as some of us on campus would really like to just simply remove them by fiat, we can't do that. The neighborhoods around us would think we were dumping our problems into their streets, and the city requires that we maintain a certain amount of parking. But the energy needed to remove this obstacle was generated when the university announced plans to install artificial turf in the back campus field as part of the Pan Am Games in 2015. there was a good number of people who were very much opposed to this idea of an artificial turf field and wanted to instead have a natural grass field remain. And there was quite a lot of activity around it, and it really underlined how much the campus matters to everyone. And as we were thinking, I will say that as the field has been implemented, it is used all the time. When I lived in Bissell House, our bedroom window looked over that field. And I will tell you that people were playing soccer there at 3, 4, 5 in the morning if the weather was nice. Even if the weather wasn't nice, the amount of activity on the back campus fields that happened after the artificial turf went in, it was phenomenal how much more it's being used. It's sometimes even used for Quidditch. But in recognizing just how much passion the back campus field had ignited, it really underlined how much people cared about the campus. And when we started thinking about how to landscape around this new artificial turf field, it became clear we needed to think more broadly. We need to find a way around the obstacle that investing in the landscape didn't confront. That's the question of what to do with the cars. So borrowing from this phrase I quoted earlier, we started what's called the Landmark Project. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Christine and Scott to talk about the Landmark Project and some of the related projects connected with it. Thank you.
Thanks, Donald. So I'll start off, and I think it's a wonderful point of departure to see the image of the back campus revitalization, because what we'll be talking about now are the 3 projects that have really gained momentum since that revitalization. One, of course, is the Landmark Project. The second, we'll talk through the climate positive campus and how that's we've had the opportunity to integrate some sustainability measures into the Landmark Project. And then I'll pass it on to Scott to talk through the Indigenous landscape at Hart House Green. Next slide. So the Landmark Project, as Donald mentioned, it's an ambitious plan to revitalize and transform the historic campus with a project that enhances the spaces. Enhances the spaces by prioritizing pedestrianization, enhancing accessibility in the public realm, enhancing open spaces with new trees, shrubs, plants, and natural lawn, as well as hardscapes, animating the public space, supporting events, and improving wayfinding in the heart of campus. And to lift the project off the ground, in 2013, as Donald noted, a project planning committee was established at the outset, and the committee included key university stakeholders. It included students, faculty, staff, and alumni to all voice and sit around. Unfortunately, I was not at the university. I came right at the end of the project planning report process, but Donald Ainsley was a co-chair of it. The group really did confront the car question, and it was through that process that prioritizing the pedestrian really became one of the core values for the project that has remained to this date, and I think brought us to this great point. So through a design competition, which was initiated in 2015, there were 4 design teams that were shortlisted, and they developed design proposals that were then presented to the public and across our 3 campuses. The successful team was KPMG Architects from Toronto and Michael Van Valkenburg Associates, a landscape architectural firm from the United States, who were selected as co-team, design team. And the team was seen as highly regarded with experience with transformative landscape projects in and outside of Toronto. What you might be familiar with Harvard Yard restoration, Princeton University landscapes, Brooklyn Bridge Park, and also in our own neck of the woods, Corktown Commons in Toronto, to name a few. Next slide. So to give a sense of scale, this is an aerial rendering of the extent of the project. Again, it's flipped on its side. So north is actually left of the screen and south is on the right. So King's College Road coming up into the front campus and Hoskin on the left. The project is about 21 acres. It's incredible, and stretches from Convocation Hall to the south over to Queen's Park. Includes the front campus, Sir Dan's Quad, Hart House Circle, as well as the 2 roads, Tower Road and Whitney Walk, that flank the back campus, bringing us up to Hoskin Avenue. Next slide. So we put together a few rendered views of the design from KPMB and MBVA to give you a sense of the landscapes that were envisioned and now in progress. This is a view from Alumni House Plaza, looking northeast towards University College. And we can see an enhanced open space, much more opportunity to enjoy the public space with additional pedestrian focused paths, naturalized landscapes, as well as new seating. Next slide. This is a view looking north from the steps of Simcoe Hall, and this reflects the prominence of space for recreation and the intent for bicycles to really share the space. So with the removal of the surface parking, replaced by a single-story parking structure below the front campus green, the open space becomes expansive, giving the heritage buildings circling the front campus much better view, much prominence, as opposed to looking at rows upon rows of cars. Next slide. This is a view outside the Gerstein Library, again with UC in the foreground. And this is interesting because the approach for the landscape was not to recreate a perfect circle, but rather to introduce secondary pathways and a necklace of gardens along the inner edge of King's College Circle. And these paths and gardens really animate the landscape, make some intimate spaces around the central green to provide a point of pause and respite for people to enjoy the activities and vistas across the central lawn. Again, new trees and plantings will provide shade and then create a variety of distinct spaces for relaxing, meeting, studying. Next slide. This is an aerial view over the front campus, and now we're looking towards the medical sciences building. And to date, there's been concrete stairs and a sort of a very add-on ramp for accessibility. But this is such a key entrance point into the university from Queen's Park that it really did merit a good rethink. And the new design includes a gently sloping landscape that's integrated so that there's no handrails or guard required, and all visitors are really able to use the same paths toward their destination, which is really a vast improvement to accessibility in the area. Next slide. This is a view of the same area in front of MedSci at grade, and we can see the gradual approach to grading, a wonderful plaza introduced to enjoy the front campus and the sunshine in the afternoon. We can also see an early rendering of the pavilion building, which is actually an arrival point to and from the below grade parking via an elevator and stair. Next slide. Moving towards Queen's Park, this is a revitalized view of the Medical Sciences Building Plaza, which is a heavily used route to and from campus from Queen's Park subway. And it incorporates new pavers, soft landscaping, with the intent here to really create a lively place for student, faculty, and visitors to gather. Next slide. This is a view from Queen's Park. So a new welcoming entrance into the front campus leading from the subway. It used to be a concrete stair. It's been replaced with gradual sloping path where accessibility is really far improved. And this welcome path is directly linked to an unprecedented donation by the University of Toronto's Student Union, representing 50,000 undergraduate students on the two campuses. So quite a remarkable gift. Next slide. Moving over closer to Hart House, here we see an animated plaza in front of Soldiers Tower that will be designed to accommodate multiple types of gathering and events, including, of course, the annual Remembrance Day ceremony that attracts hundreds to the campus. Next slide. And there's a few more views. One is close to Hart House. This image is great because it shows the intent for Hart House Circle to be more of a shared street that will allow vehicular drop-offs for special events. We see someone, I think, getting married with seamless links to walking paths and the new Indigenous landscape to the south. Next slide. This is a nice image from Hoskin Avenue looking south along Tower Road. And here you can see the transformation of Tower Road by taking advantage of the space previously used by parking. So the eastern portion of the road, which is paved in granite, becomes a really important improved connection, pedestrian connection between Hoskin and Hart House Circle, with a line of trees, benches, and light posts. It's also a really nice connection now to Philosopher's Walk. And with the removal of the surface parking, we're also able to install a landscape bleacher to be able to overlook the back campus fields and to provide a place to sit, enjoy activities happening on the field, which is not possible right now. Next slide. And a couple more views. Here we see the back campus on the right along Hoskin Avenue. And instead of a lawn, simple lawn, there's additional plantings and gardens, and really making it into an inviting place to linger. Next slide. And from Convocation Hall, looking northeast across the front campus, imagine removing all of the asphalt, the cars parked along the ring road, introducing large granite plaza with seating, which allows really a wonderful setting outside of Convocation Hall that will support a wide variety of public events throughout the year, as well as convocation gatherings. Next slide. And this is a really critical component of implementing the project, and it's been led by the university's advancement group around the ambitious fundraising campaign to date. And this slide is just a brief summary of a few of the many highlights from this campaign. Implementing this project has been in large part thanks to the generosity of a wide cross-section of donors from our diverse community. So alumni, faculty, staff, neighbors, and as mentioned before, student groups. It's rather incredible. There have been 2,500 donors to date, which is, I think we all feel, a remarkable testament to the broad support of this really important legacy transformation on the campus. Next slide.
Hey, Christine, just if I could interject briefly,
Yeah.
Jim in his introduction said that there were no longer fundraising for this. Isn't exactly true. There are still some opportunities for donations for landmarks. So we do have Ruth from Advancement here with us today, and she can answer questions if you have any about that in our Q&A.
Thanks, Donald. Next slide. And this is one last aerial image of the vision of the project. Construction has begun, and we'll share some really nice photos a bit later to show progress. This is the landmark website if you're interested in learning even more. Moving on to the second project is the Climate Positive Campus. And this is the university's ambitious Climate Positive Campus initiative. The project addresses the big question of climate change by setting the goal of exceeding carbon neutrality across the St. George campus by 2050. Next slide. While this is a campus-wide initiative, it also does interface with the landmark project. So the fascinating story here is that we now have underneath the front campus Canada's largest urban geo-exchange system, which was drilled beneath King's College Circle prior to starting to work on the parking structure. So there's 270 geothermal pipes going down 250 meters. Heat pumps circulate water through the pipes to shed the excess heat from buildings in the summer while storing it underground for use in the winter. And it's estimated that about 15,000 metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions will be saved per year through this endeavor, which is equivalent to removing about 3,000 cars off the road, which certainly makes a significant contribution to greening the campus. Next slide. So the geo-exchange field will also become part of a larger system across the campus. So additional fields beneath new capital projects as well as future, as well as an interconnected network of utility plants supporting the university's district energy system. And these initiatives are all intended to reduce the campus's carbon footprint as represented in the graph on the right. It is an ambitious commitment to reducing more greenhouse gases than we emit, creating a net benefit in our community. The next slide, please. And these are some great construction photos of the kind of machinery to install the boreholes, and they are now complete. And the last slide here. And this is essentially the website as well. Some amazing information there if you're interested in learning more. And next slide. And this is the third project to touch on, the Indigenous landscape at Tidal Creek. And I'll hand it over to Scott to share our last leg of the presentation and journey.
Thanks, Christine and Donald. As Christine mentioned, I'll do the final leg of the presentation here, just touching on two items. The first is the Indigenous landscape at Tattle Creek, and following that, we'll look at some exciting photos of the construction of the landmark project to date. Next slide, please. So Donald had kind of mentioned this theme of kind of big questions at the time we were discussing what to do about the car. I think the landmark project really addressed that core question. The Climate Positive Initiative really talks about the core issue of sustainability into the future. And I think this project really addresses the theme of reconciliation. And specifically, this project for the Indigenous landscape at Tattle Creek is associated with the university's response to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action in 2017, which identified the goal of providing Indigenous space on our campus. The site for the project, which you can see outlined on the right, is on Hart House Green, and it's within the boundaries of the landmark project. So in some ways, it's a project within a project, so to speak. And in 2018, the university awarded the design of the project to Brooke McElroy's Indigenous Design Studio. Next slide, please. So the design for the space definitely incorporates an array of significant design elements. This array was developed during an extensive consultation process wherein the university's advisory committee and the designers held workshops with the host nations, the Elders Circle, and other Indigenous stakeholders. And the image on the screen is from the northeast corner of Hart House Circle. It shows seating elements, plantings, pavings, and pathways reflective of the historical character of the site. For instance, the form of the grading for the landscape and the plantings follow the historical path of the Tattle Creek that Donald mentioned earlier, so as to invoke the history of that waterway. I also want to touch on the 1999 plan that Donald had mentioned that kind of mused about bringing back McCall's Pond on this site. The intent here is not to actually bring standing water to the site due to the various complications that come with having standing water. So this is more of an evocative gesture rather than a literal gesture. And the last note on this image is on the bottom right corner, you can see a cultural marker at the entrance path. This is one of 4 such markers. And beyond their dramatic artistic forms, these elements also serve as storytelling elements within the landscape. Text and patterns unique for each marker.
Next slide.
Oh, no, sorry, we're still on this one. So text and patterns unique for each marker will be etched upon the metal surfaces. And we see this as a really exciting move as it allows users of the landscape to really start to learn directly from the project itself. Next slide, please. Another key goal for the project was to provide outdoor teaching space, which will be achieved by the landscape amphitheater element that we see here, which integrates wooden benches that will be fabricated from wood reclaimed from the trees felled in the construction of the adjacent landmark project. Next slide, please. And here we have a final design image of the main architectural element within the landscape, the Knowledge House Pavilion. Similar to the cultural markers, the dramatic form and materiality of this pavilion was developed in consultation with the host nations and the Indigenous stakeholders. We see the form is highly expressive, and on the underside has a star map that is etched upon the metal surface. And at the ground is a fire pit that is envisioned to be used for ceremonial purposes during events that will be held here. Next slide, please. The project is scheduled to begin construction this spring. And I just want to mention that well prior to this spring, the tree protection fencing was actually erected around the trees in this space just to protect them from the adjacent landmark construction. And John Monahan, the warden of Hart House, led an initiative last spring and summer to have Indigenous artists implement pieces on these fences. And these pieces are still in place should you happen to visit the area in the next few weeks. Next slide, please. And quickly, just 2 websites for more information. The top is a website dedicated to the Indigenous Landscape Project, while the second is the university's Indigenous Gateway website that is reflective of the various works that our Indigenous Initiatives Office is involved with. Next slide, please. Now on to the final agenda item. It's just briefly sharing some exciting photos from the construction of the landmark project that we circling all the way back to the beginning of this project where we mentioned the big hole in the ground. So it's time to have a look at it. Next slide, please. Here are two shots from the excavation efforts that started last year at Front Campus. So this is the beginnings of the big hole. And what's interesting about the landmark project, and Christine touched on it when discussing just the vastness of the site and how it stretches from Front Campus through Sir Dan's and Hart House and along back campus, is that the different areas of the construction have different construction timelines depending on the scope of work. So while Front Campus requires time for excavation ahead of constructing the parking garage, other areas could begin surface level improvements to the landscape. For instance, the scope at Hart House Circle is much further along. Next slide, please. So the first step at Hart House saw the old asphalt road removed, and then crews quickly began the new granite and concrete paver surface this past summer and fall. Next slide. And here we see an image of the granite paver installation at the northeast corner of Hart House Circle under an early and late summer fall sunrise. Or sorry, I wrote early late. That doesn't make sense. Late summer, early fall sunrise. Okay, and here's another image of the granite installation along the new loop that goes around the observatory building, where the intent is that the vehicles that do share this roadway, including the UTM shuttle, will be able to circle around the observatory and head back out via Wellesley Street. Next slide, please. And now that it is winter, construction activities have ramped down in the area of Hart House. It's just too difficult to do landscape improvements on a frozen ground. So it's worth noting that efforts will remobilize in the spring, including starting construction on the Indigenous landscape. And all the construction, both of landmark and the Indigenous landscape in this area, is scheduled to end in 2022 before the end of the year. Next slide, please. And just another image at Hart House of the Winter Wonderland, but here we can still see the new granite paver drive that later transitions to granite closer, or sorry, concrete paver drive that transitions to granite closer to the building. Next slide, please. So meanwhile, while the efforts at Hart House had to ramp down for the winter, at Front Campus they have continued throughout. It's because concrete work can be done in the cold weather. So here are two images where you can see a concrete retaining wall and a few columns starting to take shape late in 2021. Next slide, please. And here's a more recent image from last month showing many more columns in progress along the retaining wall. So it's worth noting that this construction is ongoing and it's scheduled to be completed by the end of 2023. And that includes the landscape above the parking garage. So all told, the landmark project's construction should be done by the end of 2023. Next slide. Thank you. That's the end of the presentation.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Scott, Donald, and Christine. And now I'm going to go into the Q&A. I've got quite a number of questions in the chat. I would urge anybody who has any questions to please type it in the chat, and we'll go through them more or less in order. So the first one, Donald had asked for suggestions about what to do with the old SAC building. And we have somebody here who suggests that perhaps it would make a nice museum to house the collection of scientific instruments that is looking for a home. I guess somebody at the university has that.
Wow.
I'll open that to any of the panelists to answer. Any comments?
Sure, I can chime in that it's very early days on the planning for the observatory building because in many ways it's been somewhat marooned by the landmark construction around it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think any and all ideas, there are no bad ideas in this meeting, will just be taken down for consideration because there are no formal plans that have coalesced yet for that space.
Yeah, we're just starting the process, and with at U of T, we really believe in consultation and making sure people have a chance to offer their perspectives. So I think that idea is a good one. As things start to coalesce, then a more formal project planning committee, as they're called. Christine mentioned that in relation to landmark. That's a group that's tasked to kind of really scope out what the project's going to be. leading to implementation. So there's many steps to get to that point, and we're really at the very beginning. We're not even at a project planning committee stage for the observatory. It's really the UTSU just vacated it, so it's also a building that's quite difficult given its age and condition and the questions around accessibility. So I think it's going to be a challenging space.
Okay, well, thank you for that. But I'm sure that the more ideas you have, the easier it will be to find something that's worth doing. So there's another question here on the history. And by the way, Donald, that history that you gave us of the university and the campus was absolutely fascinating. You showed the early scenes of campus with no cars, and then the cars suddenly appeared. Were the roads around King's College Circle specifically built to accommodate cars, or were the roads there and then they just sort of paved them for the cars?
The roads were there and they were paved for the cars. So they were there. There are lots of images of horse and buggy and so on King's College Circle. So that was there. And then as cars arrived and you saw the mud on Yonge Street, people realized these streets these roads for cars need to be paved in a way that the horse and buggy, I guess, could deal with them more easily. So that's how it evolved.
I see. Thank you. Now, here's a question for the planners. How does a planner balance the challenge of integrating traditional architecture with new design? Here's Christine or Scott.
I can start. That's a challenge, and I guess an exciting challenge that we have on a lot of projects on the St. George campus. And actually, after I said a few words, maybe Donald, you can share a little bit about your experience with UC, the restoration there, because that's a great story. But in general, we across the campus, there's been many restorations, renovations, either additions to heritage buildings, or it's building a contemporary building that's in a more historic area where your neighbor and the surrounding neighbor and context is heritage. So we typically on these projects, there are heritage architects and planners that do come on board, and part of the process is that they do evaluate the heritage value, really understand what kind of attributes are heritage, what attributes are less than something to necessarily conserve and protect. And it really does turn into a sort of a design exercise as well in terms of, architecturally, what is the appropriate attitude to have when you're working with heritage? Is it a contemporary response, or in some cases, is it something that actually in keeping closer in tune with the materials of the heritage building is something that comes into play as well. So I'm not sure if people are familiar with some of the projects, but for instance, the image that Donald showed is an incredible one at One Spadina, where the entire front of the heritage building at One Spadina is maintained and conserved meticulously, beautifully. And then there's a contemporary landscape. And when you come around the circle to the rear, there's a modern intervention, and the relationship of that heritage to that modern intervention is done in such a beautiful way to really differentiate between the old and the new, but to have them, really come together as a new contemporary response to the building. I'm not sure if Scott or Donald want to add any thoughts.
I suppose I could add a little bit more just at a high level. One of our colleagues, Ron Sporta, from Facilities and Services, has a saying that I quite like, where it's generally the university has a commitment to maximize our existing resources. So I think that goes a long way into basically the insight about how we want to respect our existing structures. And to that end, we talked about the Climate Positive Campus Initiative, which in many ways is an engineering project, but the design team that we have retained to design that system from an engineering perspective, one of the requirements even for that job was to carry a heritage consultant on their engineering team to just basically advise the engineers as they go along of the heritage importance of our campus.
Thank you. And I think when you have these projects, there's a certain amount of culture and taste that comes into it. I can't help thinking about the ROM, where I'm not sure that the contemporary architect and the traditional architecture were married in a very friendly way. I think the two of those separately are probably fantastic architectures, but I think the marriage was not exactly made in heaven. But anyway, that's a nice long debate that we could have. So the next question, looking at the map, this appeared to be only one entry to the garage. Is that correct, or will there be more than one entry?
I'm going to presume the question is with reference to cars entering the garage.
The underground garage, yes.
Yes, there is one vehicular entry into the garage. There are 4 pedestrian entries into the garage. But the vehicular is from the Wellesley Street underpass beside Gerstein Library.
One of the, I'll just add to that because I think it's a pretty important piece to the change in circulation, is that when you're on campus, especially as much as maybe yourselves and we are, in terms of going to work every day, you'll often see fast taxis and fast cars coming through Wellesley and spinning around the King's College Circle and coming down into college as sort of a shortcut. And so one of the really nice moves on this plan is not only to remove the surface parking, but it's essentially to try and disconnect the circle from the new Hart House Circle. So as Scott noted, cars will come in through Wellesley into the parking garage and leave through Wellesley. If they come in through Wellesley, they'll come around Hart House if they don't want to park and drop someone off, and then they go out through Wellesley. But basically it's disconnecting it. So then it turns into College Street access and going around King's College Circle to do any drop off or anything to do with accessibility. And of course there's fire service vehicles, we figured that all out, but what it does do is it also starts to tame things even more and really again prioritize the pedestrian.
Yeah, I'll just add so that at the moment, if you're walking around King's College Circle, say when a class comes out of Con Hall, there are crowds of students, well, before the pandemic, crowds of students on the whatever meter and a half of the sidewalk. And then there's this big empty roadway that's serving as a parking lot where you're not supposed to walk. And that it's just getting things wrong. It's not putting the priorities in the right way. The students should come first. And so what we've done is the new King's College Circle will be really a pedestrian pathway that vehicles can use if they really need to. So for emergencies, for servicing of buildings and so on. It's not a road. It's not a road that taxis can use as a shortcut. It's rather it's a pedestrian path. And when the cars are on it, they're going to have to deal with the pedestrians. The philosophy around street design these days is that when you create the streets so that the car drivers have to look out for pedestrians in that way, they slow down, they calm down, because they know that it's not a road. And so that is what we're doing on King's College Circle.
I understand. In fact, I think that the idea of preventing the campus from being a shortcut is an excellent one. My concern is just that having used the parking lot at the new Canadian Opera building exactly once, if you have a single exit, if there's a big event like Convocation, and everybody tries to leave at once, you end up with a massive jam.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's move on.
Reasons not to drive to big events.
Another question, will there be a net reduction in paved surface area once the project is over?
So that one I'd actually have to take away. I can't tell you off the top of my head whether there is a net reduction if we compared the surface area of the new granite and concrete pavers to the existing hardscape, or it's not existing anymore, but a lot of it has been replaced as construction is ongoing. That one I would have to take away.
Okay, well, thanks, Scott. When I looked at the pictures and looked at all those paved walkways, my sort of guess would be that you've actually increased the paved space. But that's just
I think the thing that's sort of deceiving is that we've sort of inched in the roadway towards the front campus a little bit. But I actually, my memory is serving me to say that actually we've done this study and that it is a reduction. Just thinking about it, we're actually 4 cars wide in some way around the whole King's College Circle. And 3 cars wide, I guess. 3 cars wide. Yeah,
say.
and but actually it's a fast. We can dig that up and look at it.
Okay.
But I'm quite sure that it's been a reduction.
Right, thank you. If somebody wants to send it to me, I'll put it in the message that we send out to everyone at the end. Another question: for the green space on Hoskins Avenue, is that they're going to end up in a reduction in the lanes or bike lanes to make all of that work, or how is that going to happen?
It's actually already lawn. So there's a sidewalk, there's the mature trees, and then there's a green space in front of the back campus. What we're doing is essentially we're regrading it to make it a better space, more usable space, and adding plantings and so forth. But we're not changing the right of way of the city lands. It's all in our own lands that we're looking at. If I understood the question properly.
Yeah, I think that sounds about right. Now, given the money that was invested in redoing the backfield for the Pan Am Games and all the issues that resulted from our wonderful buried Tattle Creek, which apparently ended up in the basement of some U of T buildings, is that going to be dug up to accommodate the new green space?
No, the back campus field is remaining as it is, and it's the areas around it that are part of the landmark project. So the actual field is finished, it's done, it's not changing. As I said, it's incredibly popular with students, so we can't really take it out of circulation. But no, it's just the areas surrounding it, and it was actually discussions around, as I mentioned in my presentation, it was when we first started discussing, well, what do we want to do with this now that we've torn up the back field? What are we going to do with the edges? And that became an impossible question to answer without addressing the car question. And that led to our discussion of how to make our campus work for people rather than for vehicles.
Okay, thank you, Donald. Actually, mentioning bicycles and pedestrians, somebody asked the question that several slides showed both bicycles and pedestrians sharing the surfaces with the occasional car. Can that actually be made safe?
Maybe I'll build on some of the answers that Donald's already talked about through that, but I think that's, Donald, if you remember, I can't remember if it was when we were evaluating the competition proposals. I think it was once we had the new consultants on board, but they're turned into a hot debate in terms of, should there be a dedicated bike lane around King's College Circle or not? And it really does come down to that transportation philosophy around shared streets, and how do you design them so that that actually it's better to have the commingling in order to lower speeds, for bicyclists going around in cars and so forth, so that it does become safe. And so through that, the approach turned into actually, no, it will be a shared street that's commingling as opposed to a dedicated lane for bikers.
Yeah, and cyclists are anarchists. So there's always the problem that even if you have a dedicated lane for bikes, if it's not going where they want to go, they just ignore it and go wherever they want. And it also makes it hard for pedestrians if there's a dedicated lane for bicycles, because pedestrians aren't looking for that. And so there can be actually some problems there. And cyclists think, well, I'm on my lane, I don't have to look for pedestrians. So ultimately designing the landscape, and I think MBVA are just experts on this, so that when you're on your bike in this area, you're not really supposed to be there in a sense. Like it's not for you to go fast, it's for you to be in a space with others. And by designing the landscape appropriately, you get those signals and slow down. You already see that and have for a long time on Whitney Walk. So lots of bicycles use Whitney Walk and share it with pedestrians. And it works relatively well because it's a space where the bicycles know that they're not in a speed zone.
Okay, that sounds very positive. Thank you very much. Question about ecology. How do the planter stone surfaces change the distribution of water and water runoff? I don't know who can answer that. Maybe Scott. Maybe
I can start a little bit. I'm not sure exactly which planters we're looking at, but
Not the
Um,
stone surfaces. I guess it would be the surfaces of the granite surfaces of the roadway is what was meant by the question. I'm just interpreting that.
Oh, okay. So I guess part of the I guess the answer is thinking about some of the sustainable features that we have on the campus in terms of water capture. So there are for one, there's indigenous and native plant species that have been added and planting, which will help with water capture for irrigation. We also have new cisterns that are being installed to add to an existing collection of, I think we have 13 water cisterns on campus already that are used for essentially watering plants and maintenance and that sort of thing. The green roof, Scott, is I think even the pavilion, if I'm correct, it's also a green roof, correct?
That's correct.
I'm sort of going off base here, but essentially, I think the stormwater water management plan has been really conceived to be able to sort of capture as much water runoff as possible to actually have it come back into the irrigation and so forth as well.
Yeah, I would echo that with the introduction of many gardens throughout the extensive landmarks with various planting mixes, as well as the over 260 trees that are being planted throughout the area. Just the amount of retention of stormwater used for plantings in this area will definitely increase compared to the previous condition.
Well, that sounds good. Since the city has a challenge managing stormwater and stormwater runoffs, I'm glad to hear that you have a plan and that's all being looked at. Now, I have a few more questions here about the granite paving stones, but I think I'll put them aside for a minute and we'll switch to a different topic, which is the topic of art on the campus. There was a sculpture in front of Hart House that was made up of 3 pyramids. And apparently, I don't remember if I've ever did this, but if you lined up the apex of each pyramid, they also lined up to the top of the CN Tower. So the question is, has that been removed? And if so, will it be reinstalled somewhere else?
So this
I can take this one, or do you want to do it, Scott?
I wanted to brag about how this is sightlines, and it was literally the first thing I visited on campus when I toured before I became a student at U of T. But I'll let you take this one.
The artist is named James Gillespie, and it was originally installed on campus as a temporary exhibition, and at a certain point, it just kind of stayed. So it was an interesting question as we figured out, well, who owned this sculpture? You know, there are moral rights to the sculpture, to the art that the artist obviously retains, but it turned out that the university and the artist had to kind of come to an agreement as to how who owned and who was caring for it, and it was clarified that it is part of the university's collection, and it will go into storage in the university's the art museum at the University of Toronto has custodial care of all the outdoor sculpture as well as the art collection of our various art collections of the university, and so they'll be taking care of it as it's removed from that site to make way for the indigenous garden.
It may be worth mentioning in that end that one of the recent developments along College Street did unfortunately block the sight lines. You could only see the very tip of the CN Tower if you were on campus looking along the pyramids. And I also think it's worth noting that there's 2 cannons that are also located in Hart House lawn that were, I believe, associated with a donation to the Engineering Society at U of T. And the plan for those is to relocate them closer to Sanford Fleming, where the Engineering Society is today. So they'll be relocated further south down King's College Road.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much for that. Now, one of our attendees, Phil,
can I just add
sure,
on the question of art? Another piece of art that is very much was a subject of discussion and was about what the Robert Moffat sculpture outside the Medical Science Building, the double helix, the concrete sculpture, and the various installations that are in the MSB Plaza. And there was a lot of discussion about how to, particularly the double helix needed some work to be kept in good condition. And there's some point we were thinking of moving it to give a bit more space for where the pavilion was going to be, but ultimately it is not being moved. It's staying there. And the sculptures that are sort of embedded in the MSB Plaza are also being retained, and the landscape is enhancing them.
Oh, okay, that sounds good. Thank you very much. Now, one of our guests, as I was saying, has an overhead photo of the Big Dig taken in December. Would people like to see that? Christine, you interested? So Phil, if you'd like to do that, I will see if I can enable that. You should now be able to share your overhead photograph. And let's see, if you unmute yourself, I think I can, let's see if I can unmute you here.
Oh.
There we go. So where are we?
Are you in, where are you, in my home? Is that where you are?
I'm just trying to find you here so I can unmute. See, somewhere here. There we go.
Hi, folks. Sorry, I'm not in my office, so I'm not going to share my screen, but for my video. But yeah, this is from my hall, the 8th floor balcony. So you can see the concrete pillars on the left being built, and anyway, it's a good scale shot, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
And when was that taken?
December, right before our big shutdown. We were shutting down, I guess, December 16th, roughly, during the middle of exams.
Okay.
Does that zoom in for you as well? Did I get closer?
Yep, it's zooming in for all of us.
It's just an enormous scale. You can see the height of the concrete pillars here. So,
And I want to add that, you know, you think of an underground parking garage, but in this case, the natural grass lawn is going on top of it, which means that it's basically a very large green roof on this structure. So it's an interesting design challenge for handling water runoff and so on. We've already talked a little bit about that, but the architects were very thoughtful about ensuring that the lawn that's the roof of this parking garage will be a much better lawn than the lawn that we had before, which, if you'd walked across it much, was in need of some TLC.
it needed drainage.
It would be mushy, marshy.
It tended to get muddy in the spring. I can remember the engineers having chariot races on that lawn, and I think we got, it sort of reminded me of that picture you showed earlier of the car on Young Street. Now, getting back to this notion of shared spaces. So thank you very much, Phil. That was a very interesting picture there. There's some discussion here about the brickworks or Don Valley walks where bicyclists and pedestrians are supposed to share. And now I haven't used those for a while, but apparently the cyclists don't slow down on that. When people were designing the university landmark project, did they take a look at those and get any lessons learned from the existing shared spaces for cyclists and pedestrians?
Yeah, MBVA have done all sorts of work with these kinds of shared spaces, so they have a lot of expertise on this. And I will point out that, as I said, it already is the case that on campus there's shared space between pedestrians and cyclists on the Whitney Walk through the Serdans Quad. That is a major entry point for campus, and you see a lot of bicycles coming in that way, and it mostly works. It feels very different. So if you're cycling the Don Valley, you're out for a good ride. Like, you're out to go. You put on your Lycra and your clipped on shoes, and you're going fast. It's true. It doesn't feel like it's a space for pedestrians when you're a cyclist on the Don Valley. The brickworks, because it's not paved, does feel more like a pedestrian space, you know, leading up to the Moore Park Ravine there. But yeah, the Don Valley pathway is not designed for pedestrians in a very friendly way, because it does prioritize bicycle travel, I would say.
Okay, thank you. Now, here's a couple of just sort of generic questions about ability. Where is the shuttle bus going to operate? You said it was going to go around the observatory building in Hart House Circle. Is that where the stop is going to be?
Correct. The stop for the UTM shuttle will be in the same location.
Sorry, Scott, you've frozen.
So the stop for the UTM shuttle will be in the same spot that it was prior to the construction, just south of Hart House. But as Christine had mentioned earlier, there's now a broken link between Hart House Circle and King's College Circle to kind of omit that existing shortcut through campus. So rather than Hart House Circle having the north-south portion along the eastern face of University College, there'll be a quick loop around the observatory back towards Hart House, where it becomes a 2-lane road to then head back towards the Wellesley Street underpass.
Oh, okay. So it'll be a small quick turn, rather like the Glen Echo loop used to be on Young Street. And somebody else asked, how many parking spots will there be? I'd assumed it was going to be a multi-level parking garage, not just one level.
So it is just one level, which is somewhat related to the height of the groundwater in the area, but there's 236 parking spots planned in that garage. And
how does that compare to the number of spaces that were in the Hart House and King's College Circles beforehand?
So there was 154 on King's College Circle and 66 on Hart House. So slightly more.
Oh.
I think overall, when you look at the entire area that we're looking at, we're providing less, but not significantly less. But because that aerial view is so good, showing the sheer expanse of the front campus, that I think that's where you can imagine just the one level is doing quite a lot in terms of providing over 200 parking spaces.
There'll also be spaces there for bicycles if you want to have your bicycle, in a covered area and leave your bicycle there for the day. And there'll also be a number of there's a good number of electrical vehicle charging stations that'll be in the underground parking garage as well.
Oh, that sounds great. Thank you. Another question here about, I guess, similar to parking, but related to it. Where will the TTC Wheel-Trans vehicles be able to drop their riders?
So accessibility is a core value of the Landmark project, and Christine mentioned some of the ramps that were introduced. So there will be an opportunity for Wheel-Trans if someone needs to be delivered to one of the buildings that entrance is on King's College Circle currently, they'll still be able to use that path. As I said, those are pedestrian paths that vehicles that really have to use it can use it. And obviously accessibility is one of the reasons that you really need to get to the front of the building in a vehicle. So you can still drive on it. You just are driving on a space which has pedestrians. So, put on your hazards and go slowly. And that's the design.
Okay, does that also apply to the access via the Galbraith Lane?
No, Galbraith Lane. So if you go up King's College Circle, or King's College Road, I'm sorry, just when you get to sort of the Con Hall Plaza, you'll take a left onto Galbraith Lane, and that'll take you out to St. George. That's one of the main sort of vehicle routes that remains on campus at that point.
Okay. And this is from one of our female guests. Will there be security in the underground parking garage?
It's going to be, I'm not sure there's going to, I'm not sure that's actually been addressed yet on terms of an operational level.
I think there wouldn't be, let's say, a security person, that sort of thing. I think we have several underground parking garages underneath our buildings, and a group ancillary services operates those. And so just to say with Donald's point that I think we have a lot of experience with the operations and to make sure that there's safety. One of the things that's just inherent though in the design that was discussed in terms of safety is making sure that the actual height of because it is such a large parking garage, the height of the floor to ceiling is a bit higher to allow for more of that kind of clear lines and sort of sight lines. But to Donald's point, I think those are operational questions that are maybe outside of our bailiwick, but certainly security is always important, and yeah, and will certainly be addressed when it's opening.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think we're going to end with one last question, which is a high-level question. What was the overall capital expenditure for all of this project, roughly?
Fabulous question, because yesterday I was just having a question about what costs we were allowed to release in terms of the geothermal. We actually, this is not some, in terms of, because we're tendering and because we have construction currently happening, there's a certain point in the time of the arc of a construction project when we're able to kind of release the overall construction costs, and to date, I'm not sure that that's available.
Oh, okay.
But you're just gonna say it.
We'll look for that at the appropriate time. So since we've now hit 8 o'clock and I don't see any absolutely pressing questions that we haven't discussed other than, oh, there was just one small one, paving stones. Is the granite for those coming from Canada?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes,
They are Canadian.
Wonderful.
And I did see a question about longevity, and granite is a wonderful, wonderful material, and it can last a very, very, very long time. So it's an incredible investment.
Okay, well, at this point then, I would like on behalf of us all here to thank our presenters very, very much. That's Donald, Christine, and Scott. This has been very interesting, from the history of the campus in the past to a very fascinating vision of what it's going to be like very soon. I'm hoping, what is it, this summer, next summer, we'll be able to enjoy those outdoor spaces? When is that?
Next summer, you will be able to enjoy the Hart House spaces, but we'll have to wait 2 summers for front campus.
And you
For
can
front
already you can already enjoy the Sudan's Quad and the Whitney Walk, which have already opened up, and their transformation has already happened. So as Scott said, there's been a lot of staging because it's such a vast area. And with campus closed during these lockdowns, it's allowed a lot of work to move more quickly than we expected.
That's true.
Right. So even COVID has silver linings. Anyway, it's great, and I'm looking forward to seeing as many of you as we can in person on March 23rd. But again, thank you all for attending, and thank to our presenters very much for giving us this very good presentation this evening. So with that, good night, and we will pass on the recording and the chat to everyone in the next few days.
Thanks,
Good
Philip.
night,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Stay safe. Bye-bye.
There's a chair.
Yeah.
That was wonderful.
Yeah, I saw Paul Cadario was watching in from Washington.
Yes, I
Amazing.
noticed, Paul.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Rick, thanks. I've saved the chat, so I can pass the chat on to you.
Okay,
I'll send it to you and Cynthia tomorrow. Yeah.
Yeah, Cynthia will know where to find the recording.
Okay. And in spite of the emails that we sent earlier, it sounds like we will do some kind of a video link or a Zoom link for the March 23rd event. So actually, since Jim, you've had experience doing that for your lunches, I'll just see if we can take lessons learned from the way you do it.